Yeah, welcome in. Welcome back to another episode of the Format Podcast. Got a pretty interesting show for you here today. My main man, Ryan Lankford, the official Format Podcast college football analyst, is going to join us to talk the college football playoff, the amazing two games we saw last night, and of course, the preview to the championship game next Monday night. But before we get to that, if you haven't already and you're here on YouTube, please go ahead, click that subscribe, that like, that notification bell. We really appreciate it. Make sure you stay up to date whenever new content drops on the channel. If you want the audio only version of the podcast, open up your audio podcast platform, hit the search bar, type in the Format Podcast. We should come right up. If you enjoy the content, please give us that thumbs up, that like, give us that 5-star review, and leave us a comment. All that stuff helps us rise in the algorithm and gets us that much closer to the magic number of 1,000 subscribers, where we're going to go ahead and start doing live call-in shows. I'm really looking forward to that, interacting with you guys, and I'm sure you guys are looking forward to interacting with me. But make sure you're sharing the show, make sure you're liking and subscribing, and we'll get to that just as soon as we can. All right. Well, yeah, you do all those things, helps us find more sports fans, helps more sports fans find us. Let's get to it. Bruce Hope, Ryan Lankford, college football playoff. Let's go. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode. You know what it is. We're going to talk some college football, and to help me do that, of course, I got my guy, Ryan Lankford, the Format Podcast official college football analyst. Of course, we know Ryan Lankford is a former Division I wide receiver at the University of Illinois, a former Indianapolis Colt, and a former Canadian Football League wide receiver and kick return specialist. How you doing, my brother?
I'm doing well, doing well. Glad to be back. Glad to be
Definitely,
back.
man. Definitely. It's good to have you back, man. It's been a couple weeks, man.
Yes, sir. Yeah, it has been. Laying down a little bit and working, but it's been some good games that we get to cover, so I'm excited about that.
I hear that. I hear that. Well, it's 2024 and college football playoff time, and it looks like we have ourselves a national championship game. But let's talk about how we got there, shall we?
Yes, let's do it. Let's do it.
All right, so we're gonna start with what they call the granddaddy of them all, the Rose Bowl, and you being a Big Ten guy, I know that
Hmm.
you appreciate the greatness of that particular game and everything it means to be a Big Ten college football player. We had Michigan versus Alabama yesterday, and two of the best coaches in the business. Obviously, Michigan's embattled head coach, to say the least, Jim Harbaugh, and
Yep.
obviously Alabama with their coach Nick Saban, who most regard as the greatest college football coach of all time. And we got treated to, I want to say, a classic, but I suppose you could argue that because there was some kind of sloppy play involved there. But
Hmm.
before we kind of dig into the weeds on it, what was your overall take on that game? What did you think?
Well, overall, I thought Alabama was going to win. We were
Hmm.
rooting for Alabama at our
Hmm.
household, and I think that overall Alabama um, lost the game. I think Michigan did enough to give Alabama a chance to capitalize on some mistakes and some
Hmm.
stuff, and they weren't able to. Now, Alabama also didn't play to the standard that they needed to play to win, with the offensive line not doing what they need to do. But I think that Michigan did what they needed to do to win the game, and I'm excited to see them in the big one now.
So that's interesting that you would say Alabama lost the game. Now, in fairness, I'm not an SEC guy, but I think the last time we talked, and even while we were, texting in the hiatus between film and shows, it was kind of my
Hmm.
thought that as much as I thought Michigan could match up with Alabama, and they did a really good job of doing that, it was my thought that if you have to make a bet, you don't bet against Saban in these situations. He's too experienced and he's too good. And
Right.
so I thought if it came down to that, although Harbaugh is an outstanding coach as we've seen, I thought Saban would have had the slight advantage and that would have been the difference. But I turned out to be wrong, and I'm okay with that. So it actually stood out to me. That from his time at San Diego State and then Stanford and then the 49ers and now Michigan, Jim Harbaugh, oddly enough, as a guy who's a former quarterback, he is old school in that he wants to be physical, he wants to run the football, and he wants to play the great
Hmm.
defense, almost like a
Hmm.
defensive coach. But that is the type of program that he has built over his tenure here at Michigan, right? And
Yep. Yep.
he's kind of built up the type of program that could go blow for blow in the trenches with an SEC powerhouse. And it took some time, but he got it done. And,
Hmm.
he pulled off arguably one of the biggest wins in the history of his school yesterday. And I think that was one of the first things that stood out to me. But just how Michigan's defensive line was whipping Alabama's offensive line in that first half was crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's really what separated for me the game was the battle in the trenches. I think Alabama lost
Mm-hmm.
that game in the battle of the trenches. Defensive line was just putting pressure on.
Mm-hmm.
Milrow was getting sacked, losing 10, 15 yards, and
Mm-hmm.
second, third, and long. Like that's hard to dig yourself out of that.
Yeah.
And I just think when it counted, the O line didn't do what they needed to do. The center had some of those snaps, which
Yep.
it's one of those things that are hard to the centers are on a short leash, right? Because it's one of those things that you feel like that should be mandatory, that should be automatic. And when your center makes some, tough plays on your quarterback, it can really affect what goes on, the confidence and everything. So I think the offensive line definitely let the tide down this game, and that's ultimately what's causing them not going to the national.
Yeah. So Michigan doesn't have, I guess, one singular game wrecking type pass rusher, but overall, they really
Hmm.
can apply a lot of pressure with that front four. And I want to
Yep.
say, uh, what was it? 15 out of 15 rushes at the passer yesterday, 7 of them were unblocked in that first half. And I believe
Wow.
4 out of Milroe's first 6 dropbacks, he was sacked. And so Michigan was really able to get consistent pressure. And surprisingly enough, from a guy like Saban and Tommy Rees, obviously arguably the greatest coach of all time and a very experienced offensive coordinator, they really seemed, shocked at not knowing where that pressure was going to come from. And I'll say they
Hmm.
did a good job making the adjustments at halftime because the Michigan pass rush slowed down throughout that third quarter and in
Hmm.
probably about halfway through the fourth. But I think a mark of a team that might be considered great, and that could be this Michigan team if they finish the job, is a
Yep.
team that can get exactly what they need when they need it, right? So
Hmm.
Bama comes out of the break, they make the adjustments. You see it. They're keeping the fullback in, they're keeping the running back in, they're going max pro on most of the pass plays. So Michigan's pass rush slowed down, but when they needed the sack, towards the end of the game, they were able to get it, and I was pretty impressed with that. The
Yeah.
level of conditioning, the level of physicality by Michigan's defensive line against Alabama's O line.
Definitely, I agree. And then on the flip side too, they ran the ball well,
Mm-hmm.
especially in overtime. I think
Mm-hmm.
they ran the ball three straight times,
Mm-hmm.
right down the throat and punch it in.
Yeah,
When that happened, I was like, man, that's pretty Big Ten S right there.
it is, right?
Overtime, just we're gonna run it right at you. We're
Mm-hmm.
running just straight downhill, and stop it. And
Right.
unfortunately, they couldn't do it. So they look good. They look good
Yeah,
in that
yeah.
regard.
And that's funny because Bama is normally the team that breaks the opposition's will, right? By being
Right,
able to
right.
pound it. And I'm sitting there watching the game and I'm watching Alabama like starting to pick up steam during that third quarter and midway through the fourth,
Hmm.
being able to get some
Hmm.
effective running where Milroe is getting out on the perimeter and Bama's being able to run the ball. And I'm sitting there and I'm saying, oh boy, uh-oh, oh boy, here it
Hmm.
comes. Because if Bama really can get rolling, Michigan doesn't strike me as being the type of offense that's able to uh really able to big play themselves back into the game quickly because of how they're
Yep.
built. And we'll talk about Washington, who is a team that's the exact opposite and is perfectly built to do
Yeah.
that. And I know you love them, and we'll get to them next. But
Hmm.
Michigan really impressed me again, getting the stops where they needed it and being able to, physically impose their will on Alabama. You don't see that very often. And
Right. Right.
I'll tell you what, Sharon Moore has continued to do an outstanding job scheming, calling that offense, and just getting the right play in when it's needed.
Hmm. Yeah, he's really turned them around, and I think they had a good showing, and they're gonna play Washington tough.
Mm-hmm.
But they got some balls, some dogs over there in
Yeah, they
Washington,
do.
man. Some
Yeah,
of them
they do.
Huskies can play.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so what does it mean to you? I know your lady's Alabama alum, right?
Yes.
Right. So with that, you have turned your back on your Big Ten roots and now you're an SEC guy. But no, what does it mean to you to see the Big Ten be able to stand up to, the preeminent bully on the block for the last 15 years in college football, really, take their punch and punch them right back, stand up there and do it that way.
Yeah, it's cool to see. The Big Ten is a great conference, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it doesn't get a lot of, accolades, especially living here in Florida, right? They're talking
Mm-hmm.
about
Mm-hmm.
SEC, and
Right,
that's
right,
always been the talk. But it's
right.
some good football once you get to the middle of the country, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
there's up in that whether if it's running the ball, passing the ball, they've got some
Mm-hmm.
athletes, and now with the transfer portal and being able to recruit a little bit differently with
That's right.
NIL deals and all different type of things, eh, there's going to be strong football up there. And Michigan's always had a program, right? When you think Big
Mm-hmm.
Ten football, you think Michigan, Ohio State, you think those are the big
Mm-hmm.
historic traditional teams, and they look good. They look good, and
Mm-hmm.
they're gonna be strong contenders in the final, and a good team to represent the Big Ten.
Yeah.
It's a strong look for the Big Ten.
Right. Except of course for the sign stealing and whatever else that's going on that they'll
That's
be
right.
investigating for the
That's
next
right.
3 years, but whatever. We
That's
just
right.
talking on
Yep.
the field right now. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
okay. So obviously Michigan wins that thriller in overtime. And before I move on from that, it was apropos to me to see Blake Corum get that touchdown and run it in, especially as he had blown his knee out last year, wasn't able to play in the playoff. Could have left for the NFL, but says no. We've got work to do. I want to come back and finish the job. And him, I think it was a 17-yard touchdown run, and just the look on his face when he ran that in, it was something special.
Mm-hmm. 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 I missed a little bit of what you said right there, but I think what you're talking about is
Blake Corum with the touchdown run at
yes.
the end of the overtime, the first overtime
Yeah,
period.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He a strong player, right? And
Mm-hmm.
again, that was a great staple. Overtime football's tough. You know who's probably going to get the ball is really going to have to make the first play.
Mm-hmm.
And to come out there and dominate like that is impressive and really
Yeah.
puts the team that's now got to match that. He
Mm-hmm.
puts them on heels.
Yeah, I agree. And it was just good to see, with Corum, coming back, and the mentality and the mantra was to finish the job and do what they didn't get done last year. And it was
Hmm.
good to see. But now they're going to have a totally different type of test. So if we flip over to the Sugar Bowl, another great matchup. We had Texas and Washington. And now, if you remember, last time we talked, I was talking about how um, Washington has the number one pass offense in the country, right? And
Hmm.
Texas
Hmm.
had, I believe, the number 97 pass defense in the country. And
Hmm.
needless to say, Michael Penix and Roma Dunze and them boys, they took that to heart. So you see Michael Penix Jr.
They
go for
did.
430, 430 yards through the air.
It's a
And
lot. It's a lot.
they lit Texas up. And Texas wasn't quite able to get there with their front four. And I think that was a lot of people who were looking at Washington. That was their biggest fear. What,
Hmm.
what were your thoughts on that game? I know you loved it, being a wide
Yeah.
receiver and seeing that wide receiver core of the Huskies just running all over the place and making contested catches and big plays. What were you thinking watching that?
Yeah, well, I knew that if Washington receivers were able to play their game, they're going to be
Mm-hmm.
hard to stop.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that you're going to have to put pressure on the quarterback. You're going to have to kind of get him on the outside of the pocket, and have
Mm-hmm.
him play on the move the entire game, not
Right.
just stand in the pocket buying time. You're going to have
Mm-hmm.
to get him out of the pocket, making quick decisions. And they weren't able to do that. They weren't able
Mm-hmm.
to put that pressure on him. So he was able to sit back. His guys were able to get open, and that's how they're special. That's how they're special. So
Mm-hmm.
I was impressed in Washington, but wasn't surprised with what they were able to do.
Mm-hmm.
I was glad to see that Texas did kind of hang in there,
Yeah.
because it could have got ugly. It could
Mm-hmm.
have got ugly real
Mm-hmm.
fast, but they were able to kind of sustain some drives, and keep a little momentum all the way up to the end there.
Well, Washington doesn't appear to be a team that can stop the run, and Sarkisian being a very good offensive play caller, he did what a lot of these guys do and got away from the run for whatever, not whatever reason. And we know it's not sexy anymore, but pound the rock,
Hmm.
because Texas was
Hmm.
having no issue running the football. And if they'd have done that and continued to do it, they probably would have taken a few possessions away from Washington, which is, I think, what you need to do if you want to try and beat a team like that.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, they you're gonna have to get them out of what they're not. You got to take away. You got to take away what they're good at if you can. You know, if you got to spin guys over the top, if you got to press man. But the problem is they got great receivers on both sides of the ball. You
Mm-hmm.
you can only match up so many ways.
Right.
And then they got a quarterback that if you do lock them boys up, he can run for the first down. He can get
Mm-hmm.
15. He can make some plays. So
Mm-hmm.
they're gonna be a strong team. And what is going to come down to, I think, in this championship game is going to be the O line, D line, that
Mm-hmm.
matchup.
Yep.
Michigan's defensive line is going to have to get after Washington. They're going to have to break them boys down,
Mm-hmm.
and then Michigan's going to have to run the ball.
Yep.
They're going to have to run the ball because I will think Washington's secondary can hold Michigan's receivers. I think they can. If Michigan can't get the ball rolling, and it's like, hey, we need their receivers to kind of have an all-star game. I don't know if Michigan receivers can do it
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
personally.
so yeah, no, I agree.
Personally.
But just getting back to the Sugar Bowl before we look ahead to the championship game, Quinn Ewers is a talented guy. He's got elite arm talent. He's mobile. And side note, if you notice, Penix took off a few times yesterday, and I don't know if those were some wrinkles that the Washington coaching staff has been saving, because Penix will slice and dice you from the pocket. But people
Yeah.
forget that when he was at Indiana before he had those two ACLs, he was a very athletic and mobile type guy as well. So, that's no longer his game on a large scale, but if he has the opportunity to do it, he can get out and move a little bit, as you saw. Now,
Hmm.
nobody's going to mistake him for Caleb Williams, but he can move, you know?
Yeah. No, he can move. He can.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think Penix is special, and watching him, absolutely. I mean, you know what? But when you're great, that's what you're supposed to do. If you have somebody that
Hmm.
can't compete with you, you're supposed to carve them up, and that is precisely
Hmm.
what he and his coaching staff and his wide receivers did. And side note, I heard I was listening to. I want to give it the credit, but I cannot remember. I listen to so many podcasts, but I was listening to
Hmm.
a college football podcast wrapping the game this morning, and the guy says, he's a writer for CBS. I can't remember his name, but he says, now I'm going to say something that I've been wanting to say, but I was kind of nervous and didn't want to get attacked for it. And he said to me, not to me, but he said, Roma Dunze is better than Marvin Harrison Jr. He just doesn't have the
Hmm.
name, and he doesn't play for Ohio State. And it's funny
Hmm.
because I've kind of been saying that all season. And
Yeah. Yeah.
well, I've been saying more directly, if they switched uniforms, would people still think that Marvin Harrison Jr. is better than Roma Dunze, right? Now, the fact
Hmm.
that you have a Hall of Fame name, literally, right? That sure
Hmm.
helps a
Hmm.
lot. One of the greatest receivers ever to do it. And nobody's saying that Marvin Harrison Jr. is not great, because he is, but I think Roman Dunze is an absolute monster. I mean,
Yep.
he's
I agree.
big, he's fast, he's got great hands. I don't think that Marvin Harrison Jr. does anything that Roman Dunze can't do. And
Yep.
that's my, obviously I'm not a scout, but that's my opinion. So let me ask
Hmm.
you, as a wide receiver, you know the position well. Looking at those two, what separates them, if anything?
That's a great question. Um, That's a great question. I would have to check the tape
Mm-hmm.
closer because I too am on that realm of if they swap jerseys, what would it really be? Now, Marvin
Mm-hmm.
Harrison Jr. Is a great receiver.
Yes.
Um, but I also think you put Marvin Harrison Jr. in Washington's offense, he getting off just like everybody else getting off.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
they kind of all the same. And
Mm-hmm.
you switch some of the receivers to Ohio State,
Mm-hmm.
they might be able to put up the same similar numbers how they
Mm-hmm.
use that position.
Right.
But they're both interchangeable, and I shouldn't say interchangeable, they're both great receivers.
Mm-hmm.
I think they both will be able to translate at the next level.
I agree.
And I really don't think that their games are too much different, but there
Hmm.
is, definitely a nice ring to it to be Marvin Harrison's son and have that
Absolutely.
name on your back of your jersey.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear you. I hear you. Okay, well let's go ahead and do a little bit of preview and give our thoughts on the national championship game, Michigan versus Washington. You want me to go first or you going first?
Yeah, you can go.
Okay, so I was thinking about some things, right? So we talked about how outstanding Michigan's defensive line is, right? We saw how
Hmm.
physical they can be. We saw how they can get after the passer against Alabama, right? The bully. Now, that
Hmm.
said, Washington is this year's Joe Moore Award winner, which is the best offensive line in the country. And scary
Hmm.
stat, Michael Penix Jr. has been sacked only 11 times all season while leading the country in pass attempts.
Yeah.
So that tells you whatever they're doing, and I don't think they max pro a lot. It is really, really
Hmm.
hard to get to that guy. His release is not
Hmm.
slow. His receivers always seem to find a cushion. Now, that said, Michigan's secondary is a lot better than Texas's secondary, right? But
Yep.
here's the thing. If you're Jesse Minter, Michigan's this defensive coordinator, and you can't get there with your front four, you can't let Penix just sit back there. So now you have
Hmm.
to try to find a creative way to bring pressure, right? You have to maybe try to
Hmm.
blitz from somewhere. But if you blitz and don't get home, you know what Penix and those guys are going to do to you. So it's a
Hmm.
really, really calculated gamble in terms of
Hmm.
how you play them defensively. I
Hmm.
think a key is going to be whether or not Washington's running back Dylan, I can't remember his last name, but he got hurt right towards the end of the game, and what he's going to be, if he's going to be available at all for the championship game, that's going to be a big key because I think they ran last night about 30 times for just over 100 yards. Not huge
Hmm.
yardage, not huge yards per attempt. However, enough to keep the defense honest, right? And
Yep.
so if you
Yep.
can do that, it continues to open up things for Penix and those receivers. And so I'm looking at it and I'm saying, me personally, early, and I've reserved the right to change it early, I think that Washington by a little bit because these games normally come down to quarterback play, whoever's got the better quarterback
Hmm.
play, right? It's
Hmm.
quarterback play and coaching. And I think the coaching is pretty much even because Kalen DeBoer is
Hmm.
an outstanding coach. And obviously Harbaugh is an outstanding coach. He's just two of the best in the country, but you've got better quarterback play and better big play receivers offensively.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so Washington can play defense, but the other problem is on the flip side, they can't stop the run. So if
Hmm.
Michigan gets going and starts running this thing down your throat, like we know they can,
Hmm.
I know your dad, being a defender from Penn State, was pissed when Michigan ran 33 straight times on his Nittany Lions, right? And Michigan is
Yeah,
arrogant like that. If they get it going, they will
they're
run it
gonna do
down
it.
your throat with no conscience, right? And when you
Hmm.
do that, like
Hmm.
we talked about earlier, that slows the game down, that shortens the game, that takes possessions away from an explosive offense like Washington.
Hmm.
So as it stands for me now, I have Washington just by a little bit. But again, depending on things between now and the game, I reserve the right to change my mind because
Hmm.
I think it's a great matchup. Michigan's physical defense versus Washington's explosive offense, but better quarterback play in the modern game of football normally is the differentiator. So your thoughts? I
Hmm.
know I've been
Hmm.
rambling, but your
Hmm.
thoughts?
Yeah, no, I'm Washington. I'm thinking
Mm-hmm.
Washington is going to be able to do it. I think their offense is going to be powerful. But again, I think if Michigan's D line can put some pressure on the quarterback to kind of disrupt some of their passing, that will put a strain on the offensive line and the run game, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
Or what they can do is defensively, if Michigan cannot give up the big play and
Yeah.
just say, look, you're going to have to beat us. You're going to have to beat us every single yard. You're going to have to
Mm-hmm.
check it down all game long. And if Michigan can run the ball and have 80-yard
Yeah.
drives and end
Mm-hmm.
in a touchdown and a 78-yard drive end in a touchdown,
Mm-hmm.
and it really come down to whoever has the ball last and who kicked the field goal when someone else scored a touchdown, Michigan could win the game just on the back and forth, pound to pound, as long as they don't give up the big play and stop the bleeding, as we say. So
Mm-hmm.
those are the two ways that I see how it's going to be. I
Right.
don't think Michigan's D line is going to be able to get to Penix, which
I
is
don't
going
think
to
so
cause
either.
Washington to win.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
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 I
and
think
that
that's what it's going to come down to.
Yeah, and that's tough. I think, styles make fights, as they say. I think this is a great clash of styles.
Hmm.
And like we talked about, you got two outstanding head
Yeah, me too.
coaches. You've got a great quarterback on one side, you got a great running back on the other side, you got a great D line on one
Hmm.
side, a great O line on the other side. Everything matches up
Hmm.
perfectly. It's probably going to come down to mistakes, maybe more than anything.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, yeah, what is it? What did they say? Dumb loses more games than smart wins, I think. I think I heard
Dumb
somebody say
loses more
something like that.
games and smart wins. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I can see
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yeah.
I can
So
see that.
the penalties and the silly stuff and the mistakes, like Michigan literally could have probably beaten Alabama by double digits yesterday, right? But they had all those gaps
Hmm.
in the special teams, and
Hmm.
they allowed Alabama to stay around and at one point take the lead and all that. And so if you do that to Washington, you're gonna get blown out.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Because they're gonna score. They're gonna find
Yeah.
a way to beat you. And again, those receivers are good, so they gonna draw a play. They're gonna give them a chance. They're gonna say, "Yeah, go deep. We're gonna throw it up because
That's right.
you can't stop that."
No.
And that's that's gonna happen. There's gonna be a few
Hmm.
times where it's like, look, we just gonna say our guy is better than your guy. We're gonna
Yeah.
make give it a 50-50 ball, and they'll
Hmm.
come down and win those. And those plays will be the game breaking plays.
And that's what I was about to say. And I know you see this as a wideout. It seems like those Husky receivers always manage to come down with the 50-50 balls. I don't know
Hmm.
how you prepare for that or how you practice that, or is it just a function of those guys are that good?
Yeah, it's a combination of everything. Those guys are good. Um, there's two amongst all those guys. They have an understanding that hey, they talk about us. I'm sure that they got T-shirts that only the receivers got. That we're us. We're whatever we call our group. That's who they
Hmm.
are. And they probably embrace and embody what it means to carry the team on their back, if you will.
Hmm.
All great teams who get talked about, running back you and all these teams, there's a certain
Hmm.
pride that comes to that.
Yeah.
They know that they got a great quarterback who's in the Heisman ranks and who's dropping the ball off to some receivers. So there's a certain aura, that
Hmm.
they probably carry on them. So it's gonna be a good game because they're amped up.
Hmm.
Weather shouldn't be an issue, right?
Hmm.
So those are always good things when it's a good environment, and it should be just good football, and we'll see who comes out on top.
You know what? You just made a great point there talking about weather. So the Sugar Bowl was in a dome. And now you're going to
Hmm.
have the national championship game in Houston. I believe that's also in the dome, right? Was that
Hmm.
Reliance Stadium? I think no, Reliance in Vegas. But anyway,
Yeah. Well,
um,
it's not gonna be cold. It's not gonna be
right,
wet. It's not gonna be, you know
exactly,
what I mean? It's gonna
yeah,
be great things. It's gonna be great
yeah,
temperature. It's like even like when they have the Super Bowl, like when sometimes
mm-hmm,
in the Super Bowls in wherever, it can still be cold out there.
yeah, yeah.
Super Bowls in New York, like that's a cold Super
It's
Bowl
not
in
an easy
February,
place to, yeah, right,
compared,
right,
yeah, you know what I mean? Compared
mm-hmm,
to, yeah, they're having a Super Bowl in Indy. Like, oh, that's an indoor stadium. It's
right,
gonna be great.
yeah,
That type of stuff comes into play. So
mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was thinking that that's the perfect environment for basically that track team of the Washington Huskies offense. But
yep,
at the same time,
yep.
Michigan's defense is probably saying, "Listen, you guys built us to deal with Ohio State, arguably the best wide receiver core in the country. Now, Ohio
Hmm.
State didn't have the quarterback play this year that Washington has, but they had it last year. So they're saying if we can handle
Hmm.
CJ Stroud and them guys, we can handle Penix
Hmm.
and these
Hmm.
guys. So I think that
Hmm.
Michigan's secondary is not going to be lacking in confidence. And their O line is not going to be their defensive line is not going to be lacking in confidence either. And thinking about it, they're probably going to say their defensive line is saying, okay, we play against, who we believe to be the best O line in the country in practice every single day. And so their D line is
Every
like,
day.
hey, we ready. So
Every day. That's a great
yeah.
point.
Mm-hmm. I think it's going to be a great matchup. I'm so excited. But again, I think that the difference just slightly is going to be Penix and the superior quarterback play from the Huskies.
Hmm. 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 We're gonna see.
We're gonna see. We're gonna see. Well, Ryan, hey man, thank you so much for joining us again. we'll probably do I guess what might be the last one of the year next year after the next week, sorry, after the championship game. So
Hmm.
we'll have you back on and we'll wrap that up and any other crazy things going on in the world of college football, which undoubtedly there will be more
That's right.
craziness going on throughout the summer.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining the show again, man. Really appreciate you as always. And for all of you watching and listening, thanks so much for taking the time to join Ryan and I. We love having you on here. We love the fact that you listen and tune in. And make sure if you haven't already, please click that subscribe, that like, that notification bell. We're almost there to the magic number of 1,000, and we want to get these live call-in shows started. So make sure you sharing the pod, make sure you're listening, make sure you're liking and subscribing. And we'll talk to you next time. And we're out. Peace.